Hey, in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you how you can become truly fearless by getting beyond your ego, which is really the only sense of true fearlessness. Because you have an idea of yourself as a person, we develop a lot of psychological fear. Psychological fear is anything that threatens this person that you think that you are. When you do spiritual work, you begin to realize that you are not this person that you think you are. And when you have that realization, a lot of the psychological fears that you developed kind of begin to fall away. And then you find what I call true fearlessness. So what I wanted to do in the video here is first of all explain how you become fearful, how your ego develops. And when you have that understanding, I'll share with you what you can do to resolve the fear and get beyond your ego. The two things are kind of synonymous. So first of all, let's talk about how ego develops. If you imagine for the first few years of your life, you are just pure life force. There's no fear in you. You're just a baby. You have no idea of any concept. You're just living your life free. And then what happens is we have certain experiences which make us feel separate. A lot of the time, I assume the earliest experiences we have create some sort of fearful reaction in us. Because fear is such a basic, physiological impulse all living animals and mammals have. So when you're a certain age, very early on, something probably scares you or you feel afraid. And in that initial experience, you contract. So there's initial contraction. Maybe it happens when you're 2-3 years old. Maybe a bit older, but around about that sort of time, you contract. Now, that contraction is what your ego is born out of, that initial contraction. That's when you first feel separate. Oh, there's me here and there's a world outside of me. Before that, you just think it's one thing. That contraction happens. And then I think it goes one of two ways. If you have healthy parents, you're brought up very well, you're given a lot of love and support, and you're allowed to be yourself, then you will probably develop quite well. And you'll always be comfortable being who you are, you'll be comfortable in the world, and you'll probably live quite well. That's the minority of people. The overwhelming majority don't get the parenting and upbringing they need, the love and support. And so that contraction that they initially experienced becomes bigger. They get used to contracting. You need love and support so that contraction doesn't have a strong hold on you. But when that love and support isn't there, the contraction gets tighter and tighter and tighter, and then you develop in a kind of dysfunctional way. Then you develop a very strong ego. And the harder your life earlier on, the tighter this contraction is going to be. The tighter the contraction you develop, the more this hijacks your belief systems, your emotional systems, your nervous system. And then you just become like a shell of who you ought to be. But at the root cause of it is this contraction. And this contraction is very deeply programmed into your subconscious mind. It's like one of the first experiences you have. So as you can probably imagine, it's difficult to work with that contraction because it's so deeply programmed into your mind. You're not going to be able to access it in a simple meditation. It's going to take constant work and persistence, but you can get there, which we'll talk about. But ultimately, once you develop this contraction, you develop a whole personality and ego around protecting it. That is consuming so much energy. And this is why people don't have much vitality, that people don't have good health, because so much of their energy is used to hide and suppress and keep all these contractions and all the emotions and beliefs that go with it alive. So that's what most of your energy is doing. It's not supporting you to live your authentic expression. It's actually being used to suppress and keep all these dysfunctional patterns alive. And you realize this when you begin to really grow spiritually. When that ego begins to resolve, you grow so much just in life force and vitality. You literally feel like you have more energy. couple of things I've noticed. Something I know a lot of guys now feel like they have low testosterone. Seriously, if you start to heal yourself, I'm pretty sure that's going to fix a lot of your hormonal issues. You won't give a shit about microplastics and stuff like that, because when that vitality comes back to you, naturally your health improves. And you might not believe me, but until you heal and you reclaim that vitality, you won't know what I'm talking about. But that's just on a side note. Let's go back to the main point. So ultimately, when the contraction opens and resolves, we find more of ourselves. That ego and all the patterns it developed around the contraction begin to release. You start to become fearless, and your heart begins to open. That's probably where you're going to find some of the deepest contractions, is in your heart space. The heart is the midpoint between your spiritual self and your human self. And this is where we really feel the deepest wounds. We'll close our hearts, we become kind of cold. And that's one of the problems we've got with humanity today. Like, a lot of people live with closed hearts. It's not safe to open your heart, right? Stay guarded. Like, this is the message we get. To live with an open heart is one of the most courageous things you can do. But not many people are going to tell you to do that, because you can get hurt. But depends how you want to live. So how do we begin to work with these contractions? The first thing I suggest you do is you need to become aware of them. So the next time you're in a situation where you feel anxious or worried or stressed or whatever you feel, you're going to feel a contraction in your body. That is, the contractions in your body are a symptom of that original contraction when you were very, very young, right? It's manifested in your body, right? You might want to play small. When you begin to identify the contractions, then you can start to work with them. But first of all, you've got to become aware of them. For example, for me, I feel a contraction in my hip, my solar plexus, and my chest area. So these are three areas that I know, oh, this is where I carry some tightness, some tension. Something's not right? My body's literally speaking to me. When you've identified it, one way you can work with it is through simple meditation. You can just do a 10-15 minute meditation, keeping your attention on these contractions, releasing them. You can just send the intention to release the contraction wherever it is in your body, and you just do this consistently. But it's going to take time for the contraction to release, because it's probably been there for decades, and so much of your personality and the way you act and behave has revolved around it. But slowly over time, as it begins to release, a lot of the dysfunctional patterns that you had begin to release as well. But it kind of works in a cyclic way, I guess you could say, because the more you begin to become your true self, the less you start to identify with the contraction, the less you start to identify with your ego and all these negative patterns. So the more you become your true self, the more the contraction naturally begins to release, because the contraction only stays in place or gets stronger because you keep identifying with them, because you keep acting the behaviors out. You see what I mean? So it becomes this process of, okay, I'm going to release the contraction in meditation. As the habits and my patterns and I start to change and I start to become more of this, my true self, the contractions release more, and it becomes this cyclic process. Something else I suggest you do, very, very important, is use reality as a training ground, right? It's fine to do meditations at home and release your contractions, but the real test is out there in the world. When you might be in a situation where you feel anxious, like I often talk about that. I used to have a lot of social anxiety. So for me, it would be going into a situation where I feel socially anxious. So I can feel all the contractions in my body. Rather than letting me close down, I can work with them. I can say, do you know what? I'm going to breathe into this. Take deep breaths, open my body up, breathe into the contractions. And just by doing that, again, I'm making my body relax. I'm making the contractions release. I'm almost sending the message to my body that it's safe. It doesn't need to contract. And that's the power of using reality. So that's more powerful. Reality is more powerful than doing it at home, because the real tests are out in the world. Okay? Anyone can meditate all day in the house, in the bedroom, but an active meditation in the world is much more challenging. But it's a practice, right? You get better at it. If you fail the first time, you just keep doing it. It's like going to the gym, you get stronger. That's how you develop, okay? Eventually, what will happen is your heart will start to open. Like I said, the biggest contraction is probably in your heart. As you release these smaller contractions, your heart begins to open and you just begin to grow and shine more of your light, your authentic expression into the world. And that's what the world needs more of, you being who you are, okay? And you'll become fearless. Psychological fear just won't bother you as much. Will you ever get beyond all psychological fear? I don't know. Because that initial contraction when you were 2-3 years old is so deeply programmed in there. It's probably going to take a lot of work for you to resolve all of it, but don't worry, you can resolve enough of it where psychological fear doesn't hold you back anymore, and you can live free, live with an open heart. Okay, so that's everything I'm going to talk about. Hope you enjoyed the video. If it helped you out, if you could please go ahead, give a like, share, subscribe. But until next time, God bless.